wherever you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls of the planet and beyond, to Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Tonight's guest is psychic medium and paranormal investigator Natalie Fowler, co-author of Monsters of the Midwest. And I suspect we'll be blurring the lines between reality and fiction tonight. And toward the end of the show, in the second hour, we'll get Natalie's take on the state of Star Wars and the future of the franchise. For those of you who've heard past episodes of Paranormal Now, we used to do a segment called... wow, I can't even remember the name of the segment anymore. It's been so long. But we used to discuss science fiction programming as part of a full show. We don't do that anymore, but I do incorporate it into the program on occasion. So you probably know that I have some mixed feelings about the current state of Star Wars. I don't hate it. I love certain aspects of it, but we'll say that to the end of the show. But I would like to get your thoughts. So during the show, if you want to send a message through the chat room and KGRA chat, let us know. But the majority of the show, we'll be talking cryptids and paranormal. So if you're not a big sci-fi fan, don't worry. Okay, so as we go, share your thoughts and experiences with us during or after the show on Facebook. Facebook.com/ParanormalNowRadio, Instagram @ParanormalNow, Twitter @Paranormal_Now. And now on YouTube, I have the Paranormal Pop channel, which is for fun stuff like sci-fi, where I can talk about those other things that I enjoy in my life. So I wanted to do something here. I got some messages from Mike Rogers, who was our last week's second hour guest. And he was also our guest during the roundtable 2 weeks ago when we were discussing the passing of Stanton Friedman and debunking. And there were a number of points of confusion that Mike was receiving from those who had listened to the show. So I worked with Mike this weekend, and we put together a couple of things so that we can highlight what the issue was. So I allowed Mike to record a short segment, and I'm going to play that for you now. And this just gives him a chance to make a statement, say what he has to say, and we'll leave it at that. And if you have any questions or issues about that, let me know. This is a little bit uncommon. I usually don't do something like this, but Mike's a really great guy, and he's been in the background for so long, and he has a lot to share, and he's experienced so much over these years since the abduction case of Travis Walton and then the Phoenix Lights event, and he's been very mute about that. So we want to share as much as we can his wisdom with you as well. So stand by for that, and I'd love to hear what you have to say in the chat room. And that is not it. I got the wrong audio file. So give me 1 second, and we'll pull that up in just a moment.
This is Mike Rogers. Even though politics and violence still takes the forefront in the news, something very exciting is beginning to happen. Something I've been vigorously pushing for over a year now, actual disclosure. I'll get directly into that as I go, but first I need to reveal one of these sources, one of the reasons for its beginning, something which we have all been waiting for, real, physical, actual disclosure. Now, as you know, in 1975, I was a witness to the abduction of Travis Walton. For the next 20 years, my crew and I, including Travis, were hounded by the numerous skeptics. Our movie, Fire in the Sky, was released on March 12, 1993. On that very same night, Travis and I faced off with the supposed debunker, Philip Klass, on Larry King Live. But on that show, he tipped his hand. Phil had previously done legitimate debunking on other cases, but as to our case, he revealed his true hand. Klass was nothing more than a disinformation specialist from Washington, D.C. I directly accused him of that, and he never denied it. He just totally lost his cool. He pretended to prove me of certain things that were easily flipped around on him, proving his real identity as a pseudo-debunker. Now, in 1997, I was on hand to witness the Phoenix Lights. I was on a hilltop near Prescott, Arizona, and immediately realized the huge object was going along with the wind, precisely. The object was going south, and a very stiff breeze, a cold wind, was blowing directly against my back. Within the next week, I had the wind charts, and after Peter Davenport posted his mass witness UFO path map on the net, I ascertained that the officially documented wind had been blowing precisely along with the object. The same switch curving direction, the very same changing elevations, and the same speed, from above Prescott and all the way down past Casa Grande. So, when the presumed debunker, Tony Ortega, did his treatment on the Phoenix Lights, the second event, he faithfully followed the same job description as did Phil Klass, that of pseudo-debunker. Even though a real debunker would have jumped on the obvious, Ortega entirely ignored the wind alignment. He never said a word of the wind. Well, cutting to the quick, the job description they had was this. They are trained to design their reasoning to look almost feasible, almost. That almost reasoning is to be delivered in a very overbearingly stated way. And through absurd accusation and under derision, they make the leading characters of that most high-profile event out to be living martyrs. The designed result, the intelligent people of the world can reason the more likely. They absolutely hate arrogance shoved in their face, and so what the living martyrs proclaim will then be taken by the aggressive world as the previously suppressed but now obvious truth. The ultimate purpose of this is to convince the warring world that the United States, because of our obvious alien technology, cannot possibly be beaten. No logical reason to even try. Thereby creating a cheap deterrent, and even though we can easily destroy any enemy, this saves the U.S. millions and billions of dollars simply by not having to fight such wars, even skirmishes, and countless American lives. Seems very noble. And I guess it is on that level, but it's also exceptionally deceptive. Even though America actually has alien technology, why is it necessary to deceive, even in that half-lying manner? For heaven's sakes, what's wrong with the unfettered truth? Well, they've just now somehow gotten the message. Fox News and other networks have been, for the past few months, actually carrying the long-awaited news of a slowly building but partial disclosure, actual video footage of actual extraterrestrial craft filmed by Navy and Air Force pilots. Physical disclosure, not just paper, is actually beginning to happen. Anyway, my email address is mhrogers, that's spelled R-O-G-E-R-S, at 70, mhrogers70 at gmail.com.
All right, thanks, Mike. And one other question. You said that some people had communicated a misunderstanding of our last week's interview. What were their confusion points? Basically, that they didn't understand that I was saying, they didn't get the point that I was actually saying America had alien technology. Okay. Yeah.
So they didn't understand it in that respect.
Okay, good. I'm glad we cleared that up. Okay, so that's Mike Rogers. And if you have any other questions about that, let me know. I know we tried to cover so much in the past 3 weeks. And regrettably, I wish I booked Mike Rogers for a solid 2 hours so we could have taken more time to walk through and clarify some of his hypotheses and theories. But alas, here we are. And I am most grateful to be here with my guest, Natalie Fowler. Natalie, I got in touch with through Jessica Freeburg, who was also the co-author of Monsters Among Us and Monsters of the Midwest.
Yeah.
And that's how we got to get in touch. And we're going to get Natalie's take on her investigations, intrepid, if I will, investigations into the paranormal. And she's a creative writer, so I think it'll be a fascinating weaving of tales. So Natalie Fowler is an author, freelance editor, paranormal investigator, and psychic medium. Her fiction works are represented by Terry Wolf of AK Literary LLC. Natalie is also a staff editor and contributor for Fate magazine. Natalie is also a member of Ghost Stories, Inc. Natalie serves as the group's researcher and historian. Her book, Monsters of the Midwest, co-authored with Jessica Freeburg, was released in October 2015 by Adventure Publications. Her short story, Darkness Watching, can be found in Night Visions, the first anthology collection of Ghost Stories, Inc. And there is so much more to Natalie. Natalie, welcome to Paranormal Now.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. So, do you have an opinion, before we get into the other works that you do you have an opinion on the ATIP program or the release of UFO videos that are coming from the Department of Defense right now, or are you just sort of taking it in stride?
Well, I'm just kind of taking it in. UFOs aren't as much my expertise as some of the other paranormal categories, but I did like what he had to say about physical evidence. I think that stretches true across the board, no matter what you're talking about. Anytime you have something physical that can prove something is there, that's much more compelling than even just eyewitness accounts or anything like that. That's true in anything paranormal that we do, and it also fits very nicely with my very logical brain that's always looking for that hardcore evidence. Right.
If you did not see the show last Friday on History Channel, Unidentified, it was a fascinating hour.
I'll definitely go back and watch that. It sounds fascinating.
It was one of the best hour episodes of any show I've seen on this topic in particular. And I love Ancient Aliens.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of entertainment mixed into Ancient Aliens and a lot of speculation. Whereas this, it wasn't boring at all. Discussing actual real life evidence, and I thought that was one of the best aspects of it. I don't know if they can keep going with that beyond that hour, how rich each episode will be, but it was fantastic. So anybody out there who hasn't seen it, go check out Unidentified on the History Channel. Okay, so as far as your work, what got you into the paranormal in the first place?
Oh, it goes back a long time. When I was a little girl, I was fascinated by ghost stories. I was the kid at the campfire that couldn't get enough of that. However, I was always looking for something that I couldn't find in the stories that I was hearing. Everyone tells a story about how scary it is to have a ghost in your house or to see a ghost or something paranormal, but I always thought it would be equally scary to be the ghost. And so that was always the perspective I was looking for. If you were stuck somewhere as a soul and supposed to be moving on to somewhere different, and you couldn't get anybody's attention, and you weren't where you were supposed to be, I always thought that would be very scary. So that was the perspective that was compelling for me.
Sure. So do you think that we're frightening the ghosts ourselves?
Well, I think it depends. I think there are a lot of souls out there who are stuck, who maybe don't even know that they're dead. And in that case, someone else is living in their house. And so they very well might be angry about that. In other cases, yes, absolutely. I think we can be scaring them, especially if you're the paranormal investigator that's walking in a room and yelling at the air. That's something we always bring to our investigations as well, as that polite, respectful approach.
That makes me think, are there ethics that we should consider when ghost hunting in regard to respect to the afterlife, the dead, whatever?
Well, I believe that we should treat everybody with respect, whether they're living or dead. So I always like to think that if my grandma were stuck somewhere and couldn't get to where she were going, I wouldn't want anybody to yell at her. And just as a paranormal investigator, we tend to get a lot more response if you're using please and thank you and good manners. So that's just my personal experience.
Yeah.
So
I guess that's universal with all sentient beings.
You would think.
Yeah. So what was the scariest moment you had in any sort of investigation?
Oh, goodness. I think that there's a difference between being startled and being afraid. So there have been plenty times where I've been startled and you hear something you're not expecting to hear. There was an investigation. I was in the basement of the Palmer House with Jessica Freeburg. It was one of the first times I'd been investigating with the group, and we were doing an event, and there was some loud noise, and I think the two of us climbed over each other to get out of the way. But
you can feel the love in that moment.
Right. But then you realize that it's not so much that you were afraid, it's that you were just startled by something you weren't expecting.
Right.
So,
well, that's interesting you said that, because Mike Rogers, since he was just on, I mean, that was one of the problems people had with him, was that because he was the foreman, he was driving the truck when Travis Walton left the truck and was abducted, and he drove away for a little bit and then stopped and went back. But his first instinct was like, I got to protect me and the guys in this truck first.
Yeah.
Because something already bad happened there.
Yeah.
I got to run. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a natural instinct. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think it makes you non-heroic or coward.
No, of course not. And honestly, some of the more scary experiences I had were as a young child, just because there wasn't anybody there to explain it to me. Yeah. So, now that I understand more about what's there and what I'm interacting with, the fear is gone, which is one of the reasons I write what I write and do what I do, is to bring an understanding to that side of things. Yeah.
So, Monsters of the Midwest, how did you and Jessica team up to do that?
Well, that was a book that Adventure Team came to us and asked us to write. So they were looking for authors to specifically write a book about true stories from the Midwestern monsters. Mm-hmm. I'm a huge research geek and history nerd, so I like anything that involves research. And especially if a publisher is coming to you as a writer and saying, here, we're going to pay you to write this book, you just say yes. But it took a little bit to wrap our head around how we were going to approach that, because there isn't a lot of evidence out there, and here we're tasked with writing a book of true stories about this. So we decided to take a very research-based approach in that book. And we, a lot of going all the way back to the early 1900s, a lot of those stories used to get reported in the newspapers. So we pulled primary sources for everything that we wrote in that story, whether it was a news report on television or a newspaper report. I even pulled a New York Times article from, I believe, 1903 or something, early 1900s, about the reported sighting of a sea monster that had washed up on the shores of Lake Michigan. Yeah. And so that was fun. We just then went back and recreated those stories based on the true facts that we found. And it was a lot of fun. And it was especially fun to team up with her. We had some really interesting conversations. In the initial stages of planning that book, we met at a coffee shop in downtown St. Paul. And we had this whole long list of all the different monster stories we'd found. And our job was, in that moment, was to split them up and decide who was going to write about what. Mm-hmm. And our conversation went something along the lines of, okay, fine, you can have the werewolf that eats the cowboys if I can take the snake that eats dead bodies. And so we argued back and forth about which ones we got to write. And by the end, we realized we had cleared out the coffee shop. So, oh, wow. That was pretty funny.
That kind of tells something about yourself too. Which story you choose. I wonder if that's sort of telling. I
think so. Yeah, it was funny.
Yeah, I do find that funny that some people are fascinated, let's say, by arachnids or spiders, right? Someone else is fascinated with reptiles or like slimy things. I wonder what shapes us to be like that.
Yes. Well, I think it's human nature to be curious about the things that we don't understand. Mm-hmm. So that, and also to try to explore what we don't understand or what we don't know. And so the paranormal world is a whole world that is still yet to be explained completely. Yep. So it's one of those forefronts or frontiers, I guess would be a better word, frontier for exploration for people who are interested in different things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think another good term is supernatural, and I think it's used interchangeably with paranormal. and rightfully so, because until we know for a fact what something is or is not, it could be natural, and it might just be something that's beyond, supra, beyond what we know. But as a creative person, a creative writer, does your approach as an author affect your thinking as an investigator? Because I wonder that while you're investigating a particular cryptid or a ghost, have you, that the creative mind is starting to fill in things, little blanks and pieces, like, oh, I could use this, oh, I could use this. Do you think it ever sort of interferes, or?
Well, that's the purpose of Ghost Stories, Inc. That's the first paranormal group that I belong to, is to take inspiration from history, from our creepy surroundings, and let your imagination run wild with it. As I've gotten into this work more, I found that I really wanted to do something more with the paranormal. And recently, within the last year, I've actually started a new group called Paranormal Services Cooperative, where we sort of take it to the next level. It's I've met some really great people in this field who share the same goals with spirit rescue and wanting to promote paranormal unity and different things like that, and also teach others some of the ethics and some of the different things going on, and share the knowledge that we've learned in the past few years. So I think that I do a good job of compartmentalizing those different topics, I guess, or different ways to look at things. If I'm working on a novel, actually on Friday, I'm escaping and I'm going up to the Palmer House Hotel. I started a horror novel about 2 years ago, and I've been so busy that I can't get back to it, and I really need to get my head back in it. So I'm escaping there this weekend, and I'm just going to throw myself into that. And in that moment, then I'll let my surroundings inspire my work and my creative process, and it won't be so much about trying to prove what's there or explain what's there. It'll very much be more creative. So I like being able to switch back and forth, but I also think I do a good job of knowing what moment I'm in when.
Yeah.
So.
Earlier off the air, we were talking about education, and so what happened? Where did you start? And what happened?
I used to be a lawyer, which is funny. Yes. Well, so I went through, after college, I majored in business. I was very practical. I was a very practical person and wanted to think logically about what I was going to do with my life. I, again, said I was a research geek. I love research, writing, all of that. I was fascinated by legal stories and the law and learning about that. And I went on to law school and had a lot of success. I became an attorney who practiced in Minnesota for a while. I worked for a couple of different judges through all that. But eventually in law, I found my way into publishing, and that suited me much better. I'm not the greatest at confrontation.
Okay.
So the actual world of being an attorney was very overwhelming for me. And I would get very frustrated because I would work on these cases and I would spend all this time and energy doing this amazing research and writing all these briefs. And then 10 minutes later, the case would get settled and all of that work would be for nothing. So that I found very frustrating. But again, I went back to what I loved about it, and that was the research part of it. So I found a job in publishing in Minneapolis. We're lucky to have one of the largest legal publishers here. So I found my way to books again through that, and that served very well. I was a lot happier in that side of things. But meanwhile, I'd gotten my ideas for my creative stories. I started writing my first novel. And I thought, coming from this background of being fascinated by ghost stories, and then in the other turn, being surrounded by really logical and rational people, I thought it would be fascinating to take a character who's trained to think logically and rationally, like a law student, and then give them something completely irrational, like a ghost, to deal with. So that's how my creative work was born, through smashing those two worlds together. And that's really what got me into the paranormal, was just writing about it. I was researching everything I could about ghosts and what it was like to see one. And we were living overseas for a while with our little kids, and that gave me a lot of time to write and work on those stories. And then when we moved back to the United States, that's actually when I met Jessica Freeburg, and we were both writing about similar topics. And I had met her at a networking event for authors and writers. And I'll never forget when I introduced myself, she was leading the group. And when I explained what I wrote, her head just kind of snapped in my direction, because this was all different writers. There were romance writers, there were mystery writers, and here I'm talking about writing paranormal, and her head just like snapped in my direction. And we became very fast friends after that. And she had already started the group Ghost Stories Inc. at that time. And she asked me to go along. They had their film director in from New York, and they were going to be filming for their documentary on that. And she asked me to come along and tag along, and I was terrified. I was terrified because I'd been writing about ghosts for several years at that point, but I didn't know if I really wanted to go shake one out of an attic. And also I was terrified of looking ridiculous on film because I'd never done anything like this before. So I did what I do best, and that's head to the library. And I ended up doing a bunch of research about the house and where we were going. And I ended up finding some really great obituaries about the homeowner and different things like that. And my whole purpose was just to have something to talk about. So if I were on camera, I would look like an idiot. And it ended up going really well. And then she asked me to join the group shortly after that.
Oh, wow. And that's just the beginning. There's so much more to tell. We're coming up to the first break, so hang in there. Natalie has so much more to share with you. She's lived a fascinating life and has been exposed to some fascinating creatures that we can talk about, or at least research some of the fascinating creatures. Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. We'll be right back.
Hey, KGRA family, are you looking to show the world that you're a true believer? Well, shop now at thesaucerbrand.com. They've got something for the whole family. Jackets, hoodies, shirts, and hats, and so much more. And now's your last chance to use promo code KGRA for $10 off when you spend $50 or more at thesaucerbrand.com. Your new source for official and authentic ufology-inspired essentials made right here in the USA. And don't forget, use promo code KGRA at checkout and get $10 off when you spend $50 or more. Believe in style and elevate your craft at thesaucerbrand.com. And for those of you going to Contact in the Desert and Alien Con this year, Saucer will land at CITD May 31st through June the 3rd, and look for them at The Alien Con June 21st through the 23rd.
This is Richard Dolan announcing a new exclusive content website, richarddolanmembers.com. I've been working on this for a long time. Unique weekly podcasts that you won't hear anywhere else, fresh articles and blog posts, a special video series entitled Off the Cuff with Richard Dolan, regular Ask Me Anything style live chat sessions, and more. This is a full-featured member site where you will get my insights, my updates, and be able to interact directly with me. To learn more, go to richarddolanmembers.com.
Around the world for decades have come high strangeness reports of mysterious aerial lights, beams, animal mutilations, human abductions, secret space and military programs focused on an alien presence. One reporter of these Earth mysteries is Emmy Award-winning TV producer, writer, and editor Linda Moulton Howe. She reports and edits the science, environment, and real X-Files news website, earthfiles.com.
We are moving from the paradigm that we are alone in the universe to a new one in which we are not alone. And something out there is interacting with us, our animals and plant life, forcing glimpses of other realities upon us.
Linda has produced 4 large books about these phenomena with hundreds of color images and illustrations that reviewers such as New York Times best-selling author Jim Marrs describes as an amazing accumulation of evidence. All her books, An Alien Harvest, the 2-volume Glimpses of Other Realities, and Mysterious Lights and Crop Circles, along with documentaries, are available in the shop at earthfiles.com.
Your official contact for the best alternative talk on the planet. KGRAradio.com.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your most grateful host here on KGRA Radio. Tonight's guest is Natalie Fowler, and I just want to make one correction from the first portion of our show. Natalie is no longer represented by Terry Wolf of AKA Literary, so apologies for that outdated information. Okay, so Natalie, when we were leaving into the break, I wanted to know, have you ever had an encounter, a close encounter with anything cryptid or otherworldly?
I think sometimes that can be hard to explain, hard to know what you're interacting with. I've definitely had different paranormal experiences, and I think it would be pretty safe to say that some of those are from other realms or dimensions, so to speak. So, that was one of the great things about working on the Monsters of the Midwest book, is that it really opened my eyes to other possibilities. I'd been so focused on ghosts for so long that working on a project like that was refreshing. And, you're reading all these stories and it's easy to dismiss some of that stuff. But the one thing that just stuck with me from that book is how much people believed what they saw and how they were so convinced that there was something there that they were interacting with that wasn't from this world. And so I think it was just really opened my eyes to the different things that might be out there.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I saw in the KGRA chat room that Swanee, you know Swanee?
Yes.
Is a co-founder of the Paranormal Services Cooperative.
Yes. He's an amazing equipment expert. I think I told you before this show that I'm not the greatest with equipment, and my paranormal teams have learned early on to not hand me things that are important equipment pieces, and he is phenomenal at the equipment. Yeah. So
now, when you go out, do you have any of your own equipment, or do you just rely on other people bringing stuff along?
Oh, I bring the basics. I have my audio recorder and my K2 meter. Those are my standards. Yes. So.
And what about electronic voices?
Yes.
Have you captured anything?
Oh, we've got really great EVPs. Yeah.
Really?
One of the things, there are so many paranormal groups out there, and their stated purpose is to try to prove that there's something there. And one of the things that Kevin and I talk about a lot is that if you were to take all of our evidence and present it in a court of law, you would be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there is something there that you're interacting with. And there's nothing better than a good EVP to prove that. So
yeah, I think that's true. Though, would you agree with me that some people kind of go overboard and read into some things that really aren't quite clear?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I think it's important to have many people working together with their different pieces of equipment, because you can have what you think is evidence on one recorder, but then anytime you can collaborate that evidence with another piece of equipment, it's just that much better. So layering your evidence. In fact, there's an article about that coming up in the next issue of Fate magazine.
Oh, yes. And who's that article by?
That one, I think, is by Kevin Swanson. So.
Oh, there you go. And then you have an article as well.
Yes. I got to write the cover article for the next issue, and that's about the top 10 haunted castles in the United States, which was right up my alley in terms of research. You don't normally think of the United States as having castles, but there are. So that was my first step, was to research what are the castles in the United States. And then the second step was to figure out if any of them were haunted.
And have you found any that are really repetitively haunted, where you can go in and time after time find some evidence, pick up an EVP or whatever, or have an experience that it's repetitive, almost in a sense that you can go in as from a scientific mind and study it that way?
Well, I wish I had time to go in all of them several times, but I haven't had a chance to investigate any of those myself. Mm-hmm. But there were some stories, and again, like anytime you're reading stories that are out there or following someone else's report, I would much rather prefer to have that experience myself. My logical brain would want that validation rather than to rely on someone else's account. Mm-hmm. But there just aren't enough hours in the day.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's the great thing about the cooperative, is that one of you can go out and investigate something and report back on it. And so you get to have this shared experience. Is there anything in particular where you felt like you were just totally schooled because of that cooperative and made you a better investigator?
I think any teammates that you're working with can help keep you in check. I get really excited, and I also have a very creative brain. I have a very active imagination, so I count on my teammates to keep me in check if I'm getting too excited about something. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah. What about your family and your background? Was the paranormal something that was talked about growing up, or was it just tales by the fireside?
It was a lot of the stories by the campfire, but I grew up Catholic, so that was a conflicting piece a little bit. But some of the best stories that I heard were actually told by my 7th grade religion teacher at a Catholic school. So there was a little window through that, and the Catholic faith is a very mystical faith, so that is a good part of that. And a lot of the stories that I heard as a kid actually were stories of intuition from my mother and my grandmother that had survived kind of through the years. My grandmother used to tell about how she knew the day that her first husband was killed in World War II because of the things that happened to her that day. And that was something that I just sort of clung on to as I grew older, trying to figure out what was happening with me and some of the things that were kind of some of my own gifts that were waking up with that. So,
yeah. So in the book, Monsters of the Midwest, what is the scariest story that you came across?
There's a story in there about some cowboys that were riding the trail, I believe in South Dakota, and they were attacked by a person who tried to eat one of them. And so it's the vampire story in there. And, if you go back, it's most likely someone who had mental illness. I can't remember what the name of that disease was, but that one was pretty scary to be a cowboy thinking you're alone and all of a sudden get attacked by someone that's trying to eat you. That was pretty scary.
Yeah, being someone attempting to eat you is pretty scary.
There was another one. Another one was there was a woman swimming in the river in Evansville, Indiana, and she was attacked and pulled underwater by a monster. And that's very scary. As someone who grew up swimming in lakes with the weeds and everything, you could just visualize what that would feel like to have something reach and grab your leg and pull you under the water. So.
Yeah. Have you found that maybe kids are more attuned to the paranormal, or does it not matter?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the reasons that I've done so much work with my own gifts is to sort of stay ahead of my children and some of their gifts that they're displaying now. And, when I was growing up, I was always told that there was no such thing as ghosts and it's just your imagination. And eventually you start to believe that. And here, my own children, their mother is writing stories about ghosts. So I could hardly tell them that I didn't believe in ghosts when I'm out there investigating ghosts and doing what I do. So a lot of my own learning has been to kind of stay a step ahead of them and be able to help them understand what's happening. And right. I think kids these days it's almost like we're watching evolution happen right in front of us. Kids these days, I think, are born with more sensitivities, and they're more tuned into other worlds than I think we've ever seen before. And we're, I devote a lot of my time in trying to educate people on what those gifts are and how to handle them.
Well, your own children, have they had any experiences?
Absolutely. One of my middle son, when he was 5, he would wake up in the middle of the night with these night terrors, and he would tell me that there were voices in his head telling him to do stuff he didn't want to do. And at the time, I didn't even know I was as psychic as I am, but I knew enough to say, no, that's not going to happen on my watch. And I started adapting some meditations and doing some work with him to just bubble his energy. I use the visualization of Violet from The Incredibles. She has the superpower where she can throw up her force field bubble. And I started doing that work with him and talking him through how to protect his own energy field. And the voices stopped. So, whether it empowered him to take control of his imagination, if that's what you want to explain it away as, or if we actually did something to protect his energy field and clear out what was there, which is the theory I believe, then it stopped and it worked. So,
it was effective.
Power to it. It was effective. So,
okay. Now, do you think that it's more effective because this is someone that you love dearly and it comes from a very deep place in your soul? Because the idea of intention behind whatever you do, whatever the ritual it is, whatever the method is, whatever the source material is, intention, I think, really has a lot to do with it. Do you think that you applied the same method to someone you didn't know, would it be as effective?
Well, I think at the time I didn't know as much as I do now. Now I actually do that work for other people. I clear houses and I teach classes about how to keep your energy field safe. So I think back then I was doing it for him and with him because he was my son and I wanted him to sleep through the night and not have these night terrors. But it's definitely evolved into me helping other people learn about it and how to take control of your own energy field.
Right. So I'm always healthily skeptical, I think, when it comes to anything psychic, because while I do believe there are psychic abilities out there, a lot of people claim to be psychic.
Oh, of course.
And are charlatans, or they're really just interpreting, I think, possibly just the mind picking up on subtle cues in their environment.
Absolutely.
So how do you know that you're a psychic?
Again, I have a very logical brain. So I'm constantly looking for ways to prove to myself that I'm not making this up. And if you go back to that bubble example, we were at the Palmer House Hotel with a group of people, and we had some evidence where we were working with an SLS camera. Are you familiar with what that is?
Go ahead.
Oh, it's the video game system. It was used originally for the Kinect's video gaming system, I think, so that people could do interactive video games without having to hold a controller. And what they found was that the gamer would leave the room and come back and the machine would be playing by itself. And so it eventually got adapted into a really handy tool for paranormal investigations. It'll map in. The technology needs, I think, 17 or 18 points of a human body that before it can map in an image. So, for example, it won't map in a chair because it doesn't have the right points of a body. It needs a certain number of body points in order to be able to map in a figure. So we were working with this equipment up at the Palmer House, and there was an entity of some sort that had dropped down out of the ceiling and was just kind of coming up around me. And I wish we were still on video camera because I'm showing you with my hands what that was. But it was kind of coming down around me and doing some not so nice things to my head. And I was joking because I didn't want to cause concern or fear in the room at all in any way. So I was making jokes with this entity or whatever it was, saying, you need to treat me like a lady. You can't do that. And it continued to kind of attack my head. And so I just sat for a minute and I pushed my own bubble out. And the second I did that, it disappeared. So, again, there's always going to be skeptics. And so you can take it or leave it. But in that moment, it was really cool evidence that whatever I did made it stop. And it was the first time I'd seen anything like that on camera. So that was pretty cool.
Is there a connection between your psychic ability, whatever the substrate is that makes that happen, and ghosts or the paranormal?
I guess I'm not really sure if I understand your question.
Well, is there a connecting something, a substrate that ties all of that together?
Well, I think, in my work, trying to understand my own gifts and abilities, I've done a lot of work trying to figure out what's out there, and just I like to put things in order and see where everything fits in. And so just the more research and learning I've done about what ghost energies are, that makes it a little bit easier to understand how it works with my abilities. So I guess a spiritual practice would enhance or enrich your psychic abilities. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think anytime you quiet your mind and tune in your thoughts to whatever it is you want to be working on, I think that allows you to reach different levels, different vibrational levels, so to speak, that can allow you to tap into different realms and different things that are out there, I guess.
Do you meditate at all?
Yes. But I actually do some of my best meditations as moving meditations. I get a lot of downloads. So my gift works more in downloads. There's all the different psychic gifts, the clairaudience, clairvoyance, and all those different things that could be an entire topic for a different day. But the one that is my strongest is the claircognizant gift, where I just know things because I know. And so that's also the easiest one to second guess. It makes me really hard to be married to, by the way, but but it,
or it's a good thing because it kind of keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, it does.
Keeps you honest.
So my gift works in downloads. I don't see something, I don't hear something. And when you're first learning about these gifts, everybody's gifts work differently because we're all built and wired differently. So when my gifts weren't working the same as someone else's, that would be a real moment of insecurity for me. And, I can't do it that way. But you just have to I had to work hard to figure out how it worked for me. And, a lot of that in the beginning was actually helping ghosts. And that's the sort of thing that my logical brain really appreciated, because some of that I could then prove with history or prove with research in that way, to kind of, back up or provide me with some validation that I wasn't just making this up. Because believe me, that's always a question for me. How do I know I'm not making this up? And usually I'm able to find some logical way or rational way to sort of explain that. So,
are you familiar with the Beast of Bray Road?
I am.
Can you tell us about that?
That was in Wisconsin. It was the story of, so in our book, the Monsters book, that was a story, I believe, about a guy who went around and picked up roadkill. And that story was fascinating to me because that's not a job I've ever thought about before. And here was this guy who it was his job to drive along and find all the deer that had been hit by cars and scoop it into the back of his truck. And he, in doing so, I think he had left his the back hatch of his car open, and something reached in there and grabbed the deer that he had just put in there, and he saw this monster, and it startled him.
The Beast of Ray Road, do you think it's related to Sasquatch or Wolfman or something in between?
I don't know. It's entirely possible. I know that I edited another article for Fate one time that included a story about that, where it was in the same vicinity where a monster or something had come in and torn the livestock apart, and the footprints that left behind sure indicated that it wasn't anything that it would be much more similar to a Bigfoot creature than anything we recognized.
Yeah. We're coming up to a break shortly, and I recently wrote a blog post on disclosed.tv about why it is that we like to get scared. And I'd like to talk about that when we come on to the other side of the break, because I find it really fascinating that we're sort of obsessed with getting ourselves freaked out. But before we do, I'd like to know a little bit more about where we can get your book and how we can contact you if anybody has any questions, if you want to share with the audience right now.
Sure. All of my books are on Amazon. You can find me there, or my website is nataliefowler.com. I try to do a decent job of keeping up to date with my events that are coming up and different things that are happening. So, and I do a newsletter every now and then, so you can sign up for that and you'll be the first to know about all of it.
Cool. Do you get scared easily?
No.
No? Is it a tolerance that you build up because of all this, or you just naturally don't get scared easily?
I think it's a tolerance. I've definitely worked hard to try to understand what's out there.
Okay, so we're coming up on the first break. When we come back, we'll ask Natalie more about why the heck we are obsessed with scaring the heck out of ourselves. It seems odd, and yet we do it. When we wake up from a nightmare, we're not happy we had a nightmare, so why do we want to create nightmares during the day? This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio, and before we go to break, real quick, I just want to send a thank out to Neutron, Maria, Swanee, Zoner, Digger Dog, Ron, Andy, Andromeda, X-Lady. Thank you all for hanging out in the chat room. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the feedback and some of the funny GIFs. Alan B. Smith, we will be right back.
Others say all lights lead to the truth. How I
This is Richard Dolan announcing a new exclusive content website, richarddolanmembers.com. I've been working on this for a long time. Unique weekly podcasts that you won't hear anywhere else, fresh articles and blog posts, a special video series entitled Off the Cuff with Richard Dolan, regular Ask Me Anything style live chat sessions, and more. This is a full-featured member site where you will get my insights, my updates, and be able to interact directly with me. To learn more, go to richarddolanmembers.com.
Now there's a commercial-free, video-on-demand TV channel completely devoted to only the best movies on UFOs, ancient mysteries, conspiracies, and suppressed science. It's called UFO TV All Access. UFO TV All Access is now available on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, Chromecast, UFOTV.com, and download the UFO TV app from Google Play and iTunes. Go to UFOTV.com and subscribe now. That's UFO TV All Access. If it's not UFO TV, it's just a hoax.
Every 2 seconds, someone needs blood. Whether it's a natural disaster or one single child suffering from illness, the American Red Cross stands ready to supply blood when it's most needed. But blood is a perishable product. Therefore, it must continuously be replenished. You can safely donate blood every 56 days. The need is constant and patients are waiting. Call your American Red Cross at 1-800-GIVE-LIFE to schedule your life-saving appointment. Please give blood today. Patients are depending on you.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hey, KGRA family, are you looking to show the world that you're a true believer? Well, shop now at thesaucerbrand.com. They've got something for the whole family. Jackets, hoodies, shirts, and hats, and so much more. And now's your last chance to use promo code KGRA for $10 off when you spend $50 or more at thesaucerbrand.com. Your new source for official and authentic ufology-inspired essentials made right here in the USA. And don't forget, use promo code KGRA at checkout and get $10 off when you spend $50 or more. Believe in style and elevate your craft at thesaucerbrand.com. And for those of you going to Contact in the Desert and Alien Con this year, Saucer will land at CITD May 31st through June the 3rd, and look for them at The Alien Con June 21st through the 23rd.
Your official contact for the best alternative talk on the planet. KGRARadio.com.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith, and my guest tonight is Natalie Fowler, and we are talking things all creepy, scary, crawly, mysterious, shadowy, and supernatural. Before we went into the break, I asked Natalie about why it is that we get scared or want to get scared. It seems like an odd thing. It seems like counterintuitive. And Natalie, what do you think?
Well, there's definitely an adrenaline rush that comes with that, so that's kind of fun. But it's also, I think, some of it is a challenge to yourself, what you can deal with. I know as a mystery writer, it's something we talk about often when you're around other mystery writers. It's that there's a control piece to it too. When you're writing some of those creepy or scary stories, you're in control of what happens. So the other side of it is that there's a control piece.
So we hate the feeling of being out of control when we have a terrible nightmare. And when you wake up from a nightmare, your heart is racing, adrenaline is going through you, and yet that doesn't feel good. So what's the difference between the adrenaline rush of, watching a movie like Saw versus a nightmare? Does a nightmare just feel more real? And when we're watching a movie, there's a part of us that assures us that it's not?
I think it depends on the person. I actually can't watch those gory movies. You asked me earlier if I get scared of anything, and I probably get scared of horror movies more than anything. But I think that's because I just absorb myself in them, and that empath piece where you're taking on the emotions of the character you're watching can get pretty scary. But yeah, definitely the nightmare scenario is scary too, but in a different way. You don't know what's going to happen next. You also don't know if you can turn it off. When you're watching a scary movie, you can get up and walk away, or you can Google on IMDb and find all the spoilers to know what's going to happen, but you can't do that in a nightmare.
Do you think psychologically we're trying to accomplish something?
That's definitely possible. I think our dream life can be fascinating in terms of, what our body is trying to, or our subconscious is trying to, clear out or get rid of, or even resolve, I guess would be a good word for it. So,
have you had any reoccurring nightmares?
I used to have a reoccurring nightmare as a kid all the time, and I would be falling into a dark pit, and I would wake right at that moment, right before I would wake up. That was terrifying. And then I think it's
No, go ahead.
No, I think I haven't had that one since I was a child, but that definitely stuck with me for a long time after I would have that.
Yeah, I wonder what it is that we would have a recurring nightmare and it would come right intermittently over time and then just stop altogether.
Yeah. It could be some past life stuff coming through.
Well, I mean, as a psychic medium, is that something that you deal with?
Yeah, definitely. I think that dream for me was definitely about a past life where I was killed because I was pushed off a cliff. And that coincides with my fear of heights. I get terrified at the top of anything tall or high. Like crippling fear. My legs don't walk. We were touring one time in Gibraltar, and I was up at the top of the rock, and I literally had to sit down where we were and couldn't go further. It seems to have gotten worse with age, but yes. But I did a little bit of past life work, and I think it was coming from a life where I got shoved off a cliff. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've the whole past life thing, while I'm completely open to it, and I think that there has been a number of instances where you clearly can't deny it.
Yeah.
How do we know how many that we had, or is there a limit? When does it end? Is it just samsara and it just keeps going over and over and over again?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I think it depends on how old of a soul you are. You hear about kids being old souls, and I would guess that means they've had a lot of past lives. It's fascinating, though. I have a friend who does past life regressions, hypnosis style setting, and I edited an article for Fate magazine that was one of his cases where this woman had recalled being a vet from the Vietnam War, and the piece that I just clung on to was the fact that they were able to go and she read the name of the soldier's uniform. She looked down at her own uniform and read the name on the chest. Mm-hmm. And they were actually able to go find that name on the wall of remembrance of soldiers who had died. So, and her recollection lined up with that story of that particular soldier, which is insane. I think that's crazy.
That is crazy. That's the sort of thing that is undeniable.
Right.
And again, you have children in multiple situations that could find an old home in some other locale they've never been to.
Exactly.
Recognize a house or names of family members that they've never met that have long been passed generations ago and have never been spoken of since.
Right.
It's fascinating. Have you ever written any short stories in regard to past lives or anything like that?
I have not, but it's definitely a book idea that I've been throwing around. I've started recording a lot of the work that I do. I've started journaling a lot of it so that I can go back to it and be specific about what I write. Yeah.
Do you have a lot of book ideas?
Always.
Isn't that the case with like every writer, I think?
I actually have a file on my computer called Nightmare Notes. And when I have those nightmares that you talked about, I wake up and the very first thing I do is write it down.
That's brilliant because you're getting material.
Yep.
Has any of that really turned into something tangible?
It definitely feeds my creative soul, no matter what I'm doing. So if I'm working on something fiction, and I get stuck, then I'll go back to some of that, and it just gives me ideas and sort of jogs my memory or jogs that creative piece of me.
In your experiences and research, Bigfoot, do you think, or Sasquatch, do you think this is something that is just strictly a physical animal, part of our, wide branch of hominid evolutionary species, or is it something otherworldly, interdimensional, or both?
I absolutely believe it's otherworldly and interdimensional. It's the only way you can explain how people can see it, how you've got footprints, how you've got some physical evidence and then never find the actual creature. I think that's the only explanation, is that it's something interdimensional that somehow manages to move back and forth.
Yeah, do you think it ever is trying to communicate with us? Because it becomes so close to our lives. I mean, people report being called at, having stones thrown at them, peered in their windows in the middle of the night. So do you think it kind of wants us to know it's there?
I would guess so. I guess we're not going to really know that for sure until we catch one, but and have a chance to ask it ourselves.
Yeah. Is that something that you would like to encounter and do?
I'm up for any sort of adventure. It's been, it's not high on my list of things. I think I have a long list to get to that, but if I were ever in the position, I'm always one for taking opportunities that pass my way. So if that opportunity ever came across my path, I would definitely jump at it.
Yeah. What's the most mysterious story in your book, Monsters of the Midwest, that really captivated your attention?
I would have to say it's probably the river creature I mentioned before, the one that grabbed the woman while she was swimming. And I think the part of that makes it the most mysterious for me is that the follow-up in that story was that she was visited by some official men of some sort, whether they were the Men in Black or Secret Service or whatever department they were from, but she reported talking to them. And the fact that somebody didn't want her to share that story is, I think, what makes me want to know even more about it.
Interesting. So what do you think it is that prevents people from wanting to share their stories? Because let's say in this case, something happened, right? Well, why wouldn't the person share more on it?
Well, I think it's always that fear of being judged. I mean, that's one of the reasons it took me so long to really embrace my gifts, is that, everyone's got an opinion of what that is. And it's hard to speak your truth sometimes if it's something that other people don't believe in, or that people it doesn't resonate with them. It's hard to speak up and say, yeah, I'm different, or yes, I saw something really crazy. I think, there's always that fear of what someone else is going to think of you for saying that, or what they're going to judge of you for saying that.
Right. When you have gone out into the field, have there been any moments where you sort of felt, I can't share this with anybody, this was too odd or too intimate in some way?
Oh, I'm sure there's plenty of those. When you're putting yourself out there to have different experiences, yes, definitely you're going to have quite the wide range. But I think the ones that I would want to protect more would be out of privacy for whatever soul I was helping or that sort of thing. Some of those stories are really private and personal, and anytime you're dealing with a soul that is passed and maybe wanting to protect their reputation or whatever their story was that you have information about that they might not have wanted the world to know, then I think that that's something I'll keep close and not share.
Do you intimate that because of the backstory historically that you know of that person, or is that something that you get from that one-on-one experience?
I think it's a combination. I've worked on some private cases where, you also want to protect the homeowner's privacy. They don't necessarily always want someone knowing exactly what happened in their house or what. So I think it's a bunch of different layers.
Can you go into a home when someone's having trouble and connect psychically with a ghost?
Yes, I've done that. I also do a lot of work remotely. I joke sometimes that I'm a different kind of cleaning lady. I do a lot of work for the Palmer House Hotel. Mm-hmm. Whenever there's something that kind of shows up there that's not supposed to be there, I'll check in and see what's going on and try to help that situation. Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the methodology question as well.
Yeah.
We sort of touched on that earlier, but is a Catholic approach versus a Wiccan approach any better or worse? And what approaches do you use to sort of cleanse and protect your soul, etc.?
Well, I don't know that I want to be the one to judge what's better or worse. I know what works for me and what I've figured out for myself. I always am working in the greatest and highest good of any soul or property that I'm helping. Mm-hmm. I have very specific boundaries and parameters of what I'll do, I guess is the best way to explain it. I've just figured out how I need to work in a space, and
is that lighting candles, smoking the four corners? What do you incorporate in that?
I would say I use my guides and angels to help me more than anything. And just my gifts. I think that you've got a lot of things out there to help with cleansing energy and that sort of thing, the oils or the candles or the incense or sage or whatever it is you're using. But in my experience, souls that are stuck have free will choice in death as they did in life. And so if a soul doesn't want to move on from where they are, then sage isn't necessarily going to do it. You have to actually talk to that soul and convince them that they need to go on. I've actually had that conversation. I found myself one time helping a ghost, and the whole conversation going on in the back of my head was, I think I went to law school just so I could talk a ghost into crossing over to where he was supposed to go. And I found that rather funny, thinking I'm not going to put that in my alumni update, I don't think, but...
Yeah. So you're good at negotiating in a sense.
Negotiating, I think. Yeah, I've had to do that a few times.
Like, so let's get a plea deal here.
It depends on the situation. It was really funny. Actually, that was a ghost from the Palmer House, and there's a ghost at the Palmer House who pushes the mixing bowls off the top of the freezer whenever there's something wrong. And so the mixing bowls had gone flying off of the freezer in that case. And then also 2 waitresses who never report seeing anything paranormal talked about a dark shadow that was pacing back and forth in front of the oven in the kitchen. And so when I tuned into the property, I could see this guy, and I got the instant download of his story, and the best way to describe it is it's almost like someone sticks a flash drive in me, and then I just get everything all at once. So I knew that he was really angry that he had died. I knew that it was some sort of tragic, maybe ATV accident, with alcohol involved. And he was really, really upset that he was dead. And one of the reasons he was upset was because he had just left either a wife or a girlfriend behind who was pregnant or who had just had a baby, and he was really mad at himself for getting killed. Mm-hmm. And he was pacing back and forth in front of the stove. And the funny thing is he was afraid to go any further than that because he was afraid of ghosts. And I thought that was pretty funny because he was a ghost and he didn't know what to do. So he was just stuck in this one spot going back and forth. And so I started talking to him and I said, what are you going to do to help her from the kitchen of the Palmer house? And so then I'm just starting down this path of negotiation and it was an interesting moment.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be considered interesting. Have you had any other instances where things are flying across the room or physical objects being moved?
They never do it when you're sitting right there.
Right. Right. But have you had other cases where that's an issue?
I've been on investigations where you can tap on the wall and ask whoever you're interacting with to tap back. And I've had that happen. I've never personally experienced something so startling as something flying across the room.
Mm-hmm.
But I've, heard plenty of stories of those things happening.
Sure. Yeah. Do you think that it's just an intention coming from the other side? Because there's always this question of, are ghosts just residual copies of beings of the past? But if that's the case, then
it's not going to interact with you.
That's what I would think.
No, I believe that there's two different kinds of hauntings. There's a residual haunting, which is that energy getting trapped in a space. So that's the energy of the footsteps in the hallway. The Palmer house has a lot of that energy. It's been a hotel for 100 years. So, and it used to only have 2 bathrooms. So at night you hear footsteps in the hallway because for so many years at 8:00 at night, every single person in the building used to have to go to the bathroom at the same time. So you would have those footsteps going up and down the hall. And I think that energy can be trapped in a space, almost like a record player.
Right.
So that energy is not going to interact with you. But I think if a soul who is stuck in the in-between is in that same space, then you can ask it to tap on the wall in response to your taps, or that's where the EVPs come from, or that sort of thing. So, and that's more of an intelligent haunting. So, So that would be the EVP that you get where you ask a question and it actually answers, or you ask its name and you actually get a name. Those kinds of responses are much more intelligent.
Well, I suppose there could be other more nefarious responses too if you're trying to reach out.
Oh yeah.
Has anything really negative happened in your attempt to do so?
I think everybody can get crabby. So if someone doesn't want to talk to you and says, go away, I think that can happen.
So not necessarily evil,
right?
Just a bit miffed, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so I'm assuming then no spirit or ghost has tried to enter your body and take control or affect your mind?
I would not let that happen.
Okay. And so I guess because you take steps to prevent
boundaries,
that.
I set intention. As you said earlier, intention is everything. That is just not something I would ever allow.
Right. Which begs the question, is there a difference between a demon, which is said to possess a soul, and a ghost?
Oh, I definitely think so. I think you've got things from, if you start talking about the different dimensions and different things that are out there, you've got all sorts of those dimensions and levels of things that are happening. I do think that the demon is very rare.
The demon exists beyond this physical world as a separate entity. The ghost starts in this world, ends up in another dimension, if you will.
Absolutely.
The demon, we can imagine, is, depending on the religion or the mythology that we go by, it's sort of stuck in that state forever. But the ghost, is it stuck forever, or does it have a chance to go to heaven or to go to whatever next dimension?
I think it definitely has a chance, and that's a lot of the work that I'm doing in different places, is just being that opportunity for that soul, if it so chooses, to move on to wherever it was supposed to be in the first place.
And have you had any success with that? I mean, do you know if you have success with that?
Well, I think so. I've got clients that I've worked with and different things, and I think that as I said, my gifts work as more of a download of information. And there was, I think also coming from a faith, coming from the Catholic faith, I also have an understanding of the religious teachings and what's out there and what people believe about religion and what people believe. And I really think that there's a lot of souls who kind of put themselves in purgatory because they don't think that they're worthy, or they don't think that they're good enough to go to heaven because they didn't do all those things that their faith told them they needed to do to go to heaven. And I don't think that was the intent, that these souls be stuck out there in the in-between. And yes.
Well, being a former Catholic myself, I have to wonder, being a psychic medium, is that okay within the church? Because, depending on what you reference from the Old Testament, you can make the case that anything or anyone that gets involved with the paranormal is dealing in the dark arts of the devil and so on and so forth.
Right. Well, to answer that, I would say that's between me and God. And so, I believe that there's a calling for me in this, and I don't believe my gifts would be working if I were using it for the wrong reasons.
Right.
So I believe in the light and love piece of it and the good intention. And I believe that if I ever change, or if any of that ever shifts in me, then I won't work effectively anymore. So that's what I go by. And then I try not to worry about what other people might judge of that.
Right. I mean, that's just for our own mental health. That's a good place to be anyway. But yes, I agree that intention, love, compassion, if those are at the center of who you are, that supersedes everything else.
Right.
And I think that that's the ultimate goal spiritually that we should all achieve, and that if you believe in God, that's what God expects of you. So yeah, you have prophets, right? You have these mystical personalities in the Bible that do have gifts, sixth sense and beyond. And so it seems to me that that's a perfectly natural thing for humans to have. And if you have a gift like that and you're using it in the right way, then you are, Natalie, you're on par with a prophet.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
You know where I'm going with this.
Right. Well, the other thing is, I lived in Europe for a number of years. We were living overseas for a long time in Belgium. And I think there's nowhere else where, you've got the old churches that you go into. It's not hard to see how much religion was used throughout the ages as a way to control people. I believe that there's a divine message in religion, but I think it's also being interpreted by humans, and humans by their very nature make mistakes. I mean, that's what we're here to do, is learn and grow. And so, you have to kind of look past the human error in some of it in order to get to that true message. And to me, I always go back to, the greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. And I always say that even that applies even if your neighbor happens to be a ghost. And if I have the ability to help someone, my neighbor, who just happens to be someone I can't see, then I'm going to do that if I can.
Yeah. I have an anonymous question here for you. Have you ever encountered a paranormal experience that has helped you grow as a human being, a singular experience?
I think every single experience I've had has helped me grow. Everything that I've experienced has helped me learn about my gifts. But honestly, I would say probably the most profound experience I had was the very first time I saw a ghost with my own eyes. It stuck with me, and it was a time where I didn't even know I was psychic. I didn't even know that I could see ghosts or interact with them. I'd been working at a restaurant in college. And, you know, whenever you're working in a bar or a restaurant in college through the summer, that kind of becomes your social group because you're working at the times where everyone else is going out and having fun. So you have a very social life with the people you're working with. And there was a good friend of mine who was a cook. I was a waitress, and a whole group of us would hang out after work at the bar. And one night, he and a friend said that they were going to go out on Lake Minnetonka. They were going to get some beer and go out in the canoe. And the next morning or the next day, I was driving to work for the lunch shift, and the emergency rescue crews were everywhere, and they were dredging the lake. And I just got this sick feeling in my stomach, and I drove into work. And when I got there, I found out that Phil, my friend, had fallen out of the canoe, and he couldn't swim, and had been drinking, so he died. And it was a very sad time. And so everyone at work sort of rallied around that, and we all went to the funeral. And just as everything was getting back to normal, I remember it was a Saturday night, and we were in the middle of the biggest rush that we'd had all summer. And as a waitress, I would always get very annoyed when someone would order the hot fudge sundae, because the ice cream was always rock hard, and you had to stop what you were doing and scoop it out and then make the hot fudge. So it was a very, very time consuming task that no one wanted to do when they had 5 tables waiting for drinks and food. So I was over at the ice cream pit trying to scoop out this ice cream, and I stopped and I looked up, and there at the end of the kitchen was Phil. And he always used to wear these black and white Whorehound polyester pants because they were fire retardant, and it would wick away the moisture and all that. Yeah, it was funny. All the cooks would wear these crazy vintage pants, and he was standing there. So I recognized the pants and saw him standing there, and he had a big grin on his face. And in that moment, the thing that I noticed the most was that he was on the wrong side of the grill. Usually the cooks were all behind the fry pit and everything behind the line, and he was standing where the waitresses come in and out. But where he was standing was also the vantage point where you could see every single person who worked in the kitchen. You could see the cooks behind the line, you could see the waitresses, you could see the bartenders. So from his vantage point, he could see every single one of us, and he had this big grin on his face. And then I remembered that he was dead. And by the time I realized that, I looked up and he was gone. So it was just one of those moments that stuck with me for a really long time after, and was pretty profound when I would look back on it.
Yeah. And if you're just tuning in now, we're talking to Natalie Fowler, co-author of Monsters of the Midwest. And if you want to find out more about Natalie, you can go to her website, Natalie, Natalie, Fowler, FOWLER.com. Natalie, do you think that our knowledge of or accepting to believe in ghosts or the afterlife helps us deal with the death of loved ones within our own life?
Absolutely. I think that having an understanding of what's out there can really help us with that. And actually, it's what compels a lot of the people I've met in this world. They've lost loved ones, and they're trying to figure out what's out there on the other side. So I think it's a very compelling part of this.
Yeah, absolutely compelling. But I wonder, would it really make a difference? Like, I don't know if there's been any studies done, but do atheists process death, different than people who are spiritual, or I shouldn't say spiritual, but maybe believe in the afterlife? Yeah.
I think that anytime you have a faith, it's going to make that easier to understand. If from that atheist perspective, it's a pretty grim prospect if this is all there is. But that's also not for me to judge. Right,
but you have your opinion on that, and that's okay. So, do you think that everyone has a shot at the afterlife, or are some people really doomed to go to hell and that's it?
As humans, we have free will choice. So I think that there's that plays into it a lot. but I believe everybody's got a shot at it.
Okay. So now, if you're a perfectly wonderful person to other human beings, but you are unethical towards ghosts or spirits, do you get negative points moving into the afterlife?
I'm not quite sure how that all shakes out, but I believe in karma. I believe that what you put out there in the world is what comes back to you. I think that's true with anything. If you're a positive, happy person, and that's what you put out there to the world, that's what you're going to draw back. Like attracts like in this. And so if you are, more of a negative person, I think that you're more likely to attract that sort of energy.
Mm-hmm. Attract the energy. A lot of people I feel like are just born amazingly kind people. And some of us, have to work on our character defects and try to be better. So along the way, if you have someone that turns their path and they're just starting to do well, or the moment before they turn their path, they're about to turn their path towards a kinder, more righteous way, and then they die. Is that the person that gets stuck in between?
I think there's a lot of reasons people get stuck. I think sometimes it's what they believe. They don't believe they're good enough, or, from a metaphysical perspective, there's, if you're looking at the energy of things, our energetic bodies develop in utero alongside of our physical bodies. And I'm not a science person. I'm not going to have the right words to explain all that. But what I believe...
But you're a lawyer, so you can figure it out.
Yeah. But what I believe is that our energetic bodies, if you study the chakras at all, it's said that the lower level chakras are the ones where you hold your fears and that's where you hold your fears and your attachment to the real world things like your physical possessions. And so I really think that as we're going through that dying process, if you've ever watched someone who is dying, like in a hospice situation or that, a lot of times they're in and out of this world. They're talking to loved ones on the other side. They're getting closer to that veil. And so I think that as you're disconnecting your chakras in that dying process, if you're really worried about your family, or if you're really not wanting that your house to go to your son, or whatever those fears are that you're holding in those lower level chakras, I think that can cause your chakras to not disconnect properly. And I think that's the energy that can get trapped here. So, that's the best way it makes sense to me.
They say greed is the root of all evil, but isn't it really fear? I think it's hard to say which one's worse, but I think, fear, that fear of the unknown, the fear of letting go, can absolutely be a very strong hold to this world. Mm-hmm. I mean, people have anxiety. Anxiety comes from fear. People are self-conscious. It comes from fear. And I wonder, those that are greedy are afraid of not having something, that there's something's missing and they're trying to fill some kind of void.
Yes, that can definitely be true, I think.
Can a ghost be greedy too? In a sense, can a ghost have self-esteem problems or other emotional issues that humans have?
Sure, or maybe they're greedy and that they don't want anyone else in their house.
Right, right, and that's a self-centeredness, and
sure.
I think all of that comes from a place of insecurity and fear. And so, granted, some people are born in this world with brains that are not wired, like literally, physically, the same as other people. And you have psychopaths or whatever. There's something literally wrong with their brain. But then, if that's not the case, anyone who goes on a path and becomes a treacherous, evil, mean person, I always feel like that started somewhere in a fearful, dark place, and something must have been done to them to get them on that road. So in the afterlife, when you encounter these ghosts, if it's one of those people, can they get forgiveness, or can they find their way after they've already passed?
Well, I think that every single one of us is looking for love, acceptance, and understanding. And even those people who are negative, or I think sometimes all we need is a little bit of love, and that's actually how I've helped some of those ghosts. Sometimes they just need someone to understand that they had a miserable life. And the second that you say, yeah, I know, but now you can go somewhere where all it is love and understanding and acceptance, and you offer that. I think that's all they were looking for in their life that maybe they never found. And so then it's a matter of, pointing out that they're entitled to that in the afterlife. And then that allows them to go accept that.
Right. And then, of course, you have the cases of poltergeists that, it cause physical harm to people, and really, really are mean-spirited, no pun intended. Is there a different method to remove a poltergeist than help a ghost transition?
I think that the more love you have for anything that's out there, that's going to be your strongest tool in your toolbox. I helped a ghost one time, and he had just been a miserable person, and he was just looking to steal that from other people. And so, but the second you point out that they don't have to live like that in their afterlife, I think it's not hard for them to take that next step, right, if they're ready.
So there's always hope?
There's always hope. You're talking to an eternal optimist, so I will never give up hope on anybody.
Well, speaking of hope, and this is my right angle turn transition here, Star Wars.
Yes.
So for everybody listening, I don't do full shows anymore about science fiction, but on occasion, especially with Star Wars, we have to talk about it on Paranormal Now. So if you're big Star Wars fans, I think you'll appreciate this. If not, I think you'll appreciate this anyway, because Star Wars is such a huge part of our culture, and it's a science fiction film, it's a fantasy film, it's about spirituality. It incorporates myths and history. It's one of the most enriching experiences for me that I can speak of in the creative world. And when I say that, I mostly mean the original trilogy. So you're a big fan. Did you start with the original trilogy?
Oh, absolutely. That's the best. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback, so I just wanted to check that. Yes, I'm a huge fan of the original trilogy. I watched all of those movies growing up. I remember watching the original movie in the drive-in movie theater outside, and the scenes with the X-Wing fighters were, happened to coincide with the airplanes flying in and landing at the nearby airport, and it was just this incredible experience. Yeah. As a kid watching that on the giant drive-in movie screen. My husband and I actually somehow convinced the church that we got married in to let us play one of the Star Wars songs. That theme, the throne room at the end of the first movie, the first few bars sound a little bit like the wedding march, and somehow we talked our priest at the Catholic Church into letting us walk out to that song.
and he was cool with that?
Yeah, it played really fast and it got really quiet for a minute, but we managed to walk out fast enough. But yes, so huge Star Wars fan. I had all the characters and the figures growing up. In fact, when I was probably 7 or 8 probably, I desperately wanted the Luke Skywalker land speeder for Christmas one year, and I was embarrassed to ask Santa for that because I was a girl and that was supposed to be a boy's toy. But
okay, I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people especially in the younger generations, right? When the Captain Marvel movie came out recently, there is a scene where it shows her as a young girl and she wants to drive in these like go-karts, right?
Yeah.
Like pretty high-speed go-karts. And, there's this flashback scene and her father's like, no, you're not, slow down, you're a girl kind of thing, right? And people are saying, oh, that's just this feminist agenda. And I'm like, no, that actually, I'm assuming it happens to some people in America still today, but, back, in the day when you and I were growing up, it was quite common to be, you're a girl, this is what you do.
Yeah.
You're a boy, this is what you do. So I'm glad you brought that up. And that also at the same time, you loved Luke Skywalker, right?
Yeah.
He was this heroic character, and you didn't care as a woman whether he was a male or female.
No. Well, I think I really wanted the land speeder so that he could take Leia out on a date, because that was before the second movie came out, and we didn't know at that point they were brother and sister, but that's what I wanted to pretend in my head.
And the other funny thing about that is, now that we see how many other cool spaceships there are out there, Land Cruiser seems kind of tame.
Yeah, I liked it because it was like a convertible.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, with those shots too, with the sunset in the desert.
Yeah.
Sure. You can live that myth. But what was it about Star Wars, the original story, that captivated you so much?
Oh, I think it was the adventure piece of it. And it's hard to narrow it down. It just was the whole picture as a kid. There'd been nothing like it. One of the cool things that we've watched with our own kids is the making of the Star Wars movies. And if you've ever had a chance to watch that documentary, where I think they included it with one of the sets of the 3 movies, the story that tells how they had to go about making it, and just the different sound effects that they were able to do without having computers, and those things that we so take for granted now, just really adds to what that movie was and how it even got to be what it was.
What I like about it too is that while it's based in mythology, the hero's journey is really the source by Campbell, that the source material that shaped the hero's journey in this movie, and all the archetypes surrounding that. And so many different religious people from different backgrounds can overlay the Star Wars story into their own spiritual experience. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about it.
Yes, definitely. And as a writer, that especially as a writer in the paranormal world, that clash between the dark and the light that's never ending in the Star Wars movies is just something very compelling as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the new movies, they're modeling off of the old. I think they're trying to do something a little bit different. If you had to compare The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi to the original trilogy so far, what would you say are the major differences between them?
Well, I loved Force Awakens. I think we'd been waiting so long for another Star Wars story at that point. And
the fix.
Yeah, it just really woke up the whole story again in so many people. And then it ended with just such a great moment. And then that all got thrown out the window in the second one, literally like thrown away. That moment where she hands Luke the
lightsaber.
Yeah, the lightsaber. Thank you. It's been a long 2 hours. I'm losing all my words. The lightsaber, and then he, in the second movie where it opens with him throwing it behind her, that crushed my soul. Yeah. Because as a writer, that was such a great moment to end on, and then that's what I showed up to see, and I was so disappointed with how it literally threw away that opportunity.
Right, and well, you waited 2 years.
Yeah.
For that moment. 2 years of build up and anticipation. Now, the argument there, though, is that it was actually brilliant.
Well, there's an argument for everything. Of course, you could argue it either way, but personally, on a personal level, I was crushed.
Well, you're a storyteller. I mean, was that clever? Was that a way to shake things up that made sense?
Well, it was completely unexpected. So there's that, Yeah.
Well, I resonated in the same way. I'll say this. When I first saw it, I chuckled like everybody else did a little bit too, because I understood the humor of it. So all the moments in the Last Jedi that were humorous, I did chuckle for the most part. But then, and I was in that moment saying, "Wow, they're really trying to do something different here." So it was, in a sense, it was like I was kind of put under a spell. Like there was this real cool sheen, and I was like, "Ooh, look, this is different! Wow, how exciting!" And then as the days passed, like this little awkward feeling in my gut kept eating away, and I started questioning things. And I said, "Why would they do that to Luke's character?" So anybody else who's listening at this point, spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! If you have not seen The Last Jedi. So later in the film, we find out that Luke is crushed because he's trying to, spoiler alert, he's trying to train his nephew, who is the son of Leia and Han.
Yeah.
And his nephew, apparently he failed in training his nephew, turned on him. And that was enough to break Luke Skywalker. That did not make sense to me at all.
Yeah.
And I think what was interesting is that going into The Last Jedi, we all expected from the trailer that something happened, right? Like, oh my gosh, why would Luke say the time of the Jedi is over, or is time for the Jedi to end? Why would he say that, right? Why is he so beaten down, and why is he dark and sullen? And we were open to that being a reality, but for me, it just had to be a really, really good reason.
Yeah.
For him to get there. And I think the fact that all fans were open to this, and then after the film came out, when we found out how he got there, half of the Star Wars fans were furious. I think that does say something about the storytelling there. And I wonder why that is. Why were we so upset?
Yeah. Well, I think you hit on it. It has to be a compelling reason, and everything you're talking about makes me want to go back and watch it again from a whole new perspective. So might have to put that on the list this weekend.
Right. Well, see, George Lucas originally put the films together in that myth arc, the classic myth arc, right? You have a hero's journey. Yeah. So the way I always thought about it was Odysseus goes on this journey, right? As a hero, he goes through trials and tribulations, and he comes back an evolved person, a stronger person. He has more mental resolve, resilience, smarter and wiser. So imagine if they did Odysseus 2 and he had to go out and go through another hero's journey to learn the same thing that he learned the first time. I don't think that story would be very interesting.
Right, exactly. You're just learning the same lesson.
Right. I kind of feel like that's what happened here. And what about Rey? How do you feel about the character of Rey in the new trilogy?
I like her a lot. There's her flashbacks and her moments just were a really interesting way to add different puzzle pieces that the audience could watch and try to figure out and piece together. So I think her character offered a lot of opportunity for that. And as my daughter says, anytime there's girl power in a movie, it's good. But she liked the girl power aspect of Rey, and I like that the character of Rey inspired a whole new generation of Star Wars fans, and it didn't matter if you were a boy or girl. And I like that a lot because that's what resonated with me from my childhood was, going to Target and picking out the different characters and talking to my brothers about who was going to buy what so that we had the biggest collection possible and different things like that. And, to then that year that movie came out, see all these little girls running around at Halloween dressed up as Rey, that made my heart happy.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I loved what J.J. Abrams did with the character of Rey. There was the argument that she was a bit too overpowered, but that's what I think JJ does really well. He presents a mystery box to you.
Yes.
And I think that's where The Last Jedi failed, because we really wanted to know, why was she so amazing? She didn't have any training. She's tapping into the Force and learning things so fast. So we waited again 2 years, and we got no answer on that. And she became like super, super powerful. And I still like her. I love Daisy Ripley as the actress. I think she's done amazing with the material she was given in The Last Jedi. But I don't know. I was kind of let down. I wanted more. What about you?
I think I wanted more from that whole movie. So, yeah. And also the whole concept of the planet destroying, and I've only seen the movie once because it wasn't my favorite, but didn't the whole planet or starship, wasn't the whole thing to blow up another one?
Well,
or am I getting that wrong?
Well, it was basically the core storyline was a giant Star Wars, a giant ship space chasing another giant ship.
Yeah.
And that's all that was really happening. And then there was other little side things going on. So just from like a science fiction storytelling point of view, it wasn't necessarily interesting. What was supposed to be interesting about the film were the unexpected changes and directions and characters. And I think the whole idea of having a spaceship chasing a spaceship for 2.5 hours
right.
was really supposed to be a backdrop to what was happening with the characters. But I do like Kylo Ren. I think he is well written, even into The Last Jedi, because very much like his grandfather, he's struggling with what it means to have these force powers and good versus evil, because he thinks he's doing good.
Yep, and that whole tormented soul is fascinating. And he's a great actor. I like watching him.
Yep. Now, what about the prequels? Where do you stand on the prequels?
They weren't my favorite, but again, there was that whole audience and that whole generation that had never had to wait for a Star Wars movie, so it offered that. And it tells some of the backstories, but the prequels were not my favorite at all. It also makes it really confusing to talk about which movie you're talking about.
Well, that's
the first or the original or what, but no. I liked how you saw the early development of some of the characters like C-3PO and whatnot. So that was cool. But.
Well, I think what George Lucas really understands is the hero's journey and familial relationships. So even if there are other issues with the original prequels that you can pick apart, I think the whole story arc of Anakin Skywalker and his relationships with all those around him, I thought was really well done.
Yes.
And I think he made it very, very believable, his arc as a character.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other question I have, one last question about Star Wars. Do you think we need more laser sword fighting?
Well, it's certainly more interesting than the blaster scenes, but
right. And I know that it was sort of tongue in cheek when Luke Skywalker said that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I kind of felt like they were undermining the whole thing. Like, I want to see two Jedis, or a Jedi and a Sith, going at it. That's part of the action part of the film that I think is so exciting.
It is. And in that, The Force Awakens, there are some really great scenes with that. The battle scenes back and forth between her and Kylo Ren and all of that. So. Yep.
All right. Well, so we are at the end. Natalie, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was a great night.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to leave us with any last minute words of wisdom?
Oh, goodness. You're putting me on the spot.
Or anything that you want to share that you haven't been able to speak on tonight.
No, I think we've covered such a wide range. I mean, to be talking about religion in one moment and Bigfoot in another, we've covered quite a lot of ground. You really got me thinking on a lot of different things, and it was just a lot of fun. So thank you again for having me on.
Yeah, thanks. It was a lot of fun for me too. So if anybody wants to find out more about Natalie, go to nataliefowler.com. KGRARadio.com. She is a great writer. She's got a new article coming out in Fate magazine soon, so stay tuned for that. Also, stay tuned for Jimmy Church and Fade to Black in just a few minutes. You've been listening to Paranormal Now, broadcasting live on KGRA Radio, Tuesdays 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. KGRA Radio is your official contact for the best alternative talk radio. And to find out more, you can go to kgraradio.com/paranormalnow or paranormalnow.net, and on social media at paranormalnow. Special thanks to Race and Bill at KGRA Radio. And join us next week as Carol takes over the reins while I am away. You don't want to miss that. She'll be with Chase Klowetsky. And until next time, live in the mystery.